Hello everyone, I'm Eszter Vajda and welcome to Hometown Talents and Treasures. Our goal is to introduce you to people who in their own unique way educate, inform, empower, or inspire others. And today's guest certainly does all of that. He is Attorney Ramsey Bahrawy. He is an attorney in North Andover with elder care, but he gives so much of his time educating the public, educating the elderly about some of the laws that involve them. How did you get involved in elder care?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, when I started in the practice of law, I was a litigator, and I was primarily a personal injury litigator, and I represented innocent victims who were involved in accidents. And I spent 20 years litigating inside and out the courts, and had a fair amount of success being a litigator. And then my father was diagnosed with cancer, and I began then having a personal family experience with regards to the elder care and elder law types of issues. I began to learn that although my mother was highly educated, had a PhD from Harvard, she's deceased now, and my father was a medical doctor, I learned that the two of them actually had made lots of mistakes that I also learned were quite common. And I began to also learn that they had deferred a lot of their planning like a lot of people do. So a lot of people have a historical propensity to basically say, you know what, I can do this planning tomorrow. And then when tomorrow comes, they find themselves in a crisis situation. And any decisions that are made in crisis are always emotional decisions, and emotional decisions are always bad decisions. So I decided, you know, I should get involved in this. I should educate people, I should motivate people and inspire people to do the planning sooner rather than later so they don't find themselves in those critical situations.
So what are some of the mistakes that you found your parents doing that you learned from?
Well, the first mistake that my father and mother made is, my father being a doctor, he had amassed quite a bit in terms of assets, and all he had was a will. He did not prepare for any issues that may occur later in his life. For example, he did not have a healthcare proxy, did not have a power of attorney. He didn't have those documents, he just had a will. He didn't have a trust. If he would have had a trust in place, number one, he would have assisted the family in terms of paying less federal and state tax. Estate tax, I should say. It also would have avoided any probate process. So there were things that could have been done that he didn't do. Now, fortunately, he still had time to live, and I was able to talk to him and get him back to his lawyer and get these things done. But imagine if he would have passed away when he was diagnosed. None of this would have been done. None of the appropriate planning would have been in place, and it would have actually hurt the family.
From your experience, what are some of the top issues that are facing boomers?
Well, I think the top issue, the most important issue, is that boomers need to be good Boy Scouts. And what I mean by that is the Boy Scout motto is be prepared. So they need to be prepared. They need to think ahead, and they need to ask themselves, what is my family health history? What issues has my family had in the past? Because those issues are predictors. Now, it's no guarantee that you'll have the same health problems that your relatives had, but it's a predictor. It's a very good possibility you may have one or more of those problems. So for example, if somebody has a history of cardiac issues, dementia, specifically Alzheimer's disease, it's very possible, even probable, that they will end up with those issues, and you can prepare for that. And if you're a good Boy Scout and you are prepared and that issue comes along, then you're ready. One of the most heart-rendering situations that I see in my office is a husband and wife will come in and they'll say, you know, we now need to get our estate planning done. We need to do a comprehensive plan. We need to have the will. We need to have the trust. We need to have the durable power of attorney. We need to have the healthcare proxy. And I'll say, okay, well, what's the family health history? And say, well, you know, we just came back from our doctor, and he had sent us to a neuropsychiatrist who's a specialist, and he just diagnosed husband or wife with dementia. Well, that puts me in an awkward spot to do the plan. How do I know that that person is now competent to actually make a plan? Had they come to me a week, a month, a year earlier, we probably could have done all the appropriate planning without now having to contact the doctor, find out, does the doctor believe this person is competent? Can I get a letter so I can make sure that whatever documents I prepare and are signed by this person are signed while this person is in a competent condition? With regard to elder law and what an elder lawyer does, because there's a very big misunderstanding out there that all elder lawyers do is deal with estate planning, and that's just not true. Elder law is a very broad area of law, so it involves estate planning, which we've touched on. It involves real estate, which is what you just asked about, so an elder law attorney needs to understand real estate law. But it also involves issues that come before the probate and family court, issues such as guardianship, conservatorship, estates. having to settle an estate. That, an elder law attorney has to be familiar with that. And then, of course, there's elder abuse. As an elder law attorney, you have to understand what is elder abuse and what remedies are there in the event that there's elder abuse, and how do you handle all of that. One of the things that I try to do to advise people, and again, as I said earlier, the whole idea is to plan ahead, and that is if you're living in a large house where you raised your family and you had your children, you need to think, someday I'm going to downsize. Someday I'm going to move into something that's smaller, something that's more appropriate, and to quote you, something that's a little more affordable. But there are options to that. You may not need to go out and acquire your own property. Maybe you want to move in with a son or a daughter. Is it appropriate that you do that? Is it actually a good thing that you do that? And we need to talk about that. We need to talk about the pros and cons of moving in with somebody who already has their own family. You know,
and there's a term for that, right? The sandwich
generation, right? And you know, and then there's the issue of assisted living, where you can actually, you know, get some assistance because you know, the assistance with activities of daily living, so assistance with bathing and with toileting and with dressing and that sort of stuff. And that's a landlord-tenant relationship with regard to assisted living. And so there are all these options out there, and people need to consider the housing options, and then need to consider, you know, which of these options do we think are going to be most appropriate for us? Again, looking at our family health history. You know, what are the risks that we need assisted living? What are the risks that someday we need nursing home care? Which is, you know, I'm the first to say I don't want to live in a nursing home. I don't think anybody wants to live in a nursing home. But for some people it's necessary. Given the wonders of modern medicine, we are living longer today. And if we live longer, we're going to live with age-related disability. That's just a natural. I mean, people are getting hip replacements, they're getting knee replacements, they're getting surgeries that are done with regards to their heart and other parts of the body that allows them to live longer. But that results in disabilities. You need to prepare for those disabilities, not just financially, but in terms of your legal papers. You see, the estate plan is like a roadmap or like a GPS. It leads you towards your goals for the rest of your life, and then what happens after your life is gone. And a lot of people really don't understand that. You know, my father, for example, who just wrote a will, he figured estate planning is just what happens after I die. No, it's everything that happens while you're alive, and then everything that comes thereafter.
And nowadays, boomers, it seems, are staying at work a little bit longer. And I think part of the reason is because of the economy, that a lot of them feel like they need to keep working. But there are other reasons why they are staying longer. Part of it is health. They're healthier, they're living longer, they don't want to retire.
So that's very true, Esther. There's no doubt that the bursting of the credit bubble in 2008 has set boomers back quite a bit. A lot of boomers lost value, not just in the stock market, but also in their real estate. Many of them had to end up doing what are called short sales, where they basically were underwater, had to sell the real estate for less than what they owed. Others ended up going through a bankruptcy. Actually, one of the major issues with elders today is elders in bankruptcy, is elders in debt. Boomers are having debt issues as well. Boomers, unfortunately, many boomers, let me rephrase that, many boomers didn't do a very good job of actually preparing for retirement, so they didn't save as much money as they could have. And a lot of that had to do with what I mentioned a little bit earlier, and that I'll have time for that tomorrow. I'll be able to do that some other day. Procrastination, absolutely. You know, it harkens me back to a phrase that Shakespeare used in his work The Tempest, and that is past is prologue. And what I believe that means is that what you do or don't do in the past significantly influences your future. And we're seeing that with many boomers who didn't do the appropriate financial planning and now find themselves in a situation where they have to work longer than they anticipated. And you're absolutely right in terms of boomers feeling better health-wise and also living longer. They actually want to have something to do. They don't want to have a traditional retirement where they get the gold watch and sit in the rocking chair and wait for the day to come when they're going to pass away. No, they actually want to be productive. So some who have done the appropriate planning actually find themselves volunteering, or they are entrepreneurial, they're opening up new businesses, and they're moving on, and they're using the experience that they had from their work life in order to try to pursue something that they actually like. I actually have plans to do a show. As you know, I do a television show on doing what you love. And I want to bring in a boomer who's starting a new business and who's now actually doing what he or she loves versus the day-to-day drudge job that they had before.
Statistics about the actual number of abuse that happens versus the minimal number of reports that happen. And this type of abuse can happen anywhere from, you know, in an elderly home, in a an elder care home. It could also be someone who comes to your house and takes care of you. It could be a child. It could be a relative. It is really a wide spectrum of people that can really wreak havoc on elders. It's a big issue.
It's a huge issue. Elder abuse breaks down into several different categories. The one that we hear the most about and that's most common is financial exploitation. But there's physical elder abuse, there's sexual elder abuse, and there's several others. But I'm going to focus on the most common, which is financial exploitation. Most financial exploitation, believe it or not, most financial exploitation of an elder, believe it or not, is usually from someone they know. It's a relative, it's a friend, it's a neighbor. It's very rarely from a stranger, but it can be from a stranger. It can be from a door-to-door salesman. It can be from somebody who gets on the phone and basically says, I'm a army buddy of your deceased husband. Not true, just say it. And he always told me that if I need to sell a product, I should call you and you'd be really interested in it. Next thing you know, this person has sold a bill of goods and sold something they don't even need. That's a form of financial exploitation. The good news with regards to financial exploitation is the banks are kind of onto this, because the scenario that the banks most oftentimes see is they'll see their customer with a young person with them come and want to cash a check at the teller's window. And it's oftentimes a big check. I'm not talking $1,000 or $500. I'm talking $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 check. And the banks will always say, listen, we need you to fill out a form because you're cashing out anything over $10,000. And then that's and that's a legitimate thing. And then oftentimes I get the phone call and say, your client is here. Mrs. Jones is here. She's trying to cash a check for $15,000. What do you know about this? She's got some young man next to her. And I tell them, I don't know anything about it. I said, tell her to come see me before you cash the check. And then she'll come in and then she'll tell me that she's got a son or a daughter who's a drug addict who really needs some money because he owes money to people and they're going to break his legs. And that whole story. I don't know if there's any truth to it or not. But you know what? That's financial exploitation.
What about companies exploiting the elderly with bogus claims?
Well, you certainly have that sort of thing happen. Let's be honest. The elderly have become a target, and the older, and I've seen it. Both my parents were elderly; they're now deceased. The older they got, the easier they were to sell things to, the easier they were to fool.
I've heard many reasons for the discrepancy in the reports and why it's not talked about so many times. And one of the things that I hear often is that the elderly are very embarrassed by this, that they're being exploited at that age. What are some of the other reasons?
Well, they're definitely embarrassed, and they also don't want to get that, as I said, they usually know who's exploiting them. They don't want to get that person into trouble. They don't want to go run to the police and have the police bring charges, create a family problem. They just don't want any of that. Let's understand elder abuse is being taken very, very seriously. It's part of Obamacare now.
Retire and you think, I'm going to go to Florida. I'm going to go to North Carolina. I'm going to go to South Carolina, one of those southern states. But it is incredible to me that I read that a lot of cities in this country are not prepared to house boomers. They're not prepared for the onslaught of boomers. They're not prepared in terms of public transportation. There's no sidewalks. There's not enough continuing education. There's not enough health care. What are some of the cities that that are more prepared, and what should boomers look for when relocating to another city?
Well, boomers oftentimes relocate for one of several reasons. One reason is a change in temperature, an environment that's really more conducive to how they feel as they grow older. Secondly is finances. Oftentimes they're looking to move into a community where it's a little bit more affordable than a Massachusetts or a New York or a California, which are very expensive states. So as you mentioned, you're looking at a Florida, you're looking at a South Carolina, perhaps a North Carolina. You're also looking at a New Mexico or an Arizona. You're looking at those kinds of things, and you're right. some of the infrastructure that's necessary to accommodate the boomers, it just isn't there. And when it comes to Florida, I'm very stunned that it's not there, because Florida has been known as the community where people go back and forth. You have your
What happened to that government planning, right?
it just isn't there. I actually spent some time in Palm Beach, which is a beautiful community down in Florida, but Palm Beach is not prepared for, to quote you, the onslaught of boomers. The sidewalks that are necessary are not there. The public transportation that's necessary is not there. You've got to drive yourself, and let's be honest, transportation, as people grow older, it becomes a huge issue.
It's their independence.
It's their independence, number one, but number two, can they continue to drive safely? And if they can't continue to drive safely, what can they do to learn to drive safely? And there are answers to all of these questions, but if you're on your own in a place like a Palm Beach, or even worse, a Miami, I mean, there's no one to help you. You know?
Now, as you go around and give talks at Lowell General, at Holy Family, at Lawrence General, to these elderly groups, what are some of the main concerns and questions that they have?
The questions that they usually have to do with the uncertainty with regards to their life expectancy and their health. And they say, how do we make a plan if we don't know what our health's going to be? We don't know what our life expectancy is going to be. And I tell them, listen, the absolute worst plan is no plan. You have no plan, then you know what, you're in the absolute worst position. You make a plan, you make a mistake, you can fix that plan. But how do you fix a plan if there's no plan and you're gone and you're not around to make a plan anymore? So let's do the best we can based on the information we have. What's your health history? What are you doing? Are you doing anything that's dangerous in this life? Are you skydiving? Are you doing, let's find out what's going on with you, and let's make a plan based on that. And if we have to change it, we'll change it.
I want to talk about something that perhaps a lot of people may not know about you, that you were actually at a young age at the 1972 Olympics. And because you spoke so many languages, you helped usher people around. Talk about that experience. Fascinating.
Sure. I was a high school student, and my mother asked me, or showed me an advertisement in the Boston Globe Parade magazine. The International Olympic Committee was advertising for people to work at the Olympics. And she said, listen, you can speak multiple languages, why don't you apply? And I said, sure. Why would they want me, of all people? And she says, well, hold on, think for a second. You can speak multiple languages. What have you got to lose? And I saw the wisdom in that. So anyway, I applied. Make a very long story short, I eventually got hired. The Olympic Committee hired me, and they hired me to be a...
That was a big Olympic.
Yeah, and they hired me to be a supervisor in the gymnastics stadium, and so I got to meet a lot of the Olympic athletes. I got to meet Olga Korbut, who was the Soviet gymnast. I got to meet Kathy Rigby, who was the U.S. gymnast. I got to meet Jim Ryan, who was the miler for the United States at the time. And the list goes on, and we exchanged pins, and I still have the uniform and the pins and all that kind of stuff. I was there when, just before the Olympics started, the black African nations threatened to boycott. The South African athletes that showed up were all white, and the black African nations felt that that was apartheid and it shouldn't go on. Avery Brundage, who was the head of the International Olympic Committee, basically said South Africa is a sovereign country. It can make any decisions that it wants. Then the media stepped in and basically said, listen, we're paying you top buck to air these things. We want to make sure somebody like Kip Keino, who's the miler for Kenya, runs in these Olympics, and if they boycott, that's no good to us. The very next day, South Africa was banned. Black African nations stepped in, they participated. Then we had the issue with regards to the basketball game between the Soviet Union and the United States. We also had an issue with regards to two black 100-meter sprinters for the United States not showing up for their race, and as they said, they overslept, and it created a big issue there.
An incredible experience.
Oh, it was. And then we had an issue with regards to a Canadian boxer. I'm sure that wasn't. He ended up being arrested for drunk driving. I mean, I was just there to see it all happen. And of course, we had the issue of the 6 Israeli athletes that were taken hostage, and a shootout at the Munich airport. At the Munich.
That was an exciting Olympics to be at.
Yeah, there was a lot going on. That's for sure, and it's an experience I'll never forget.
Final question for you. You mentioned earlier that the reason that you got into elder care law is because of your parents, but you continue to do your show, to give your talks. You continue to volunteer and speak solely to elderly, inform them, empower them. and educate them really about some of the new laws. What keeps you going?
Well, I have a passion for talking to the elderly. I've always, since I was younger, I've always worked with elderly. I've always gotten along with elderly, and I just have a real passion for trying to educate them. And I try to use the kind of analogy that I gave you a little bit earlier. I try to make everything very understandable to them. I try to, break everything down. I try not to talk in legalese with them. I try to talk in simple English, give them lots of analogies, lots of stories, get them to understand. Because as I said earlier, I need to inspire them in order to motivate them. And once they're motivated, hopefully they'll be motivated to come to me.
What have you learned from them?
What I've learned from them...
How have you changed in this process?
I actually have become a lot more patient, I think. As a litigator, litigators aren't very patient. We're very aggressive. I'm less aggressive, more patient, more willing to sit back. You learn more by listening than by speaking. And so I've learned when a client walks in, I ask them, why are you here? Tell me your story, and I just sit back and listen. Just listen. And they'll tell me a lot of things that are irrelevant, but that's okay. I'm there to listen, to hear their story, and then I'll jump in at some point and steer them into the right direction and hopefully be able to work with them in the long term.
I've spent a lot of time with some elderly as well and volunteering, and they all have a great story.
They do.
We have to remember that they all had a life, and one time they were full-time employees. They all have their pains, their heartaches, and their joys, and they have a lot to tell and a lot of wisdom to pass along.
Absolutely. I honestly believe that everyone in this world has a story to tell. Everybody.
Attorney Ramsey Bahrawy is our guest. Thank you so much for coming in on this Sunday.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I enjoy doing this.
And that's this edition of Hometown Talents and Treasures. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you tune in next week for another episode.